It was a typical morning at the office until the lady CEO dropped a bombshell that would shake him to his core. "You're fired," she said, her voice cold, almost gleeful. For Jamal, a single dad already fighting the world's unfairness, it was more than just a job loss. It was a clear message. But what he said next, that moment would change everything. The room fell silent. Was this the end for Jamal, or the beginning of his fight against something much bigger? You won't believe how this confrontation unfolds. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. Jamal Walker was no stranger to hard work. A 28-year-old single father, he balanced his life between two worlds: the office where he worked as a junior marketing exec, and home, where he was everything to his 5-year-old daughter, Maya. He'd been at the company for 3 years now, fighting to build something better for his daughter, something he never had. Every day, he'd wake up before dawn to get Maya ready for school, then rush to the office, determined to leave behind the struggles of his past and make something of himself. But in a city like Chicago, that was easier said than done. The office was like any other, sleek, modern, with a view of the bustling downtown skyline. The people there were professional, but with an unspoken hierarchy that Jamal had noticed from day one. There were the core people, mostly well-heeled, mostly white, who had been there for years. And then there was the rest, people like Jamal, who were trying to climb the ladder, often overlooked and fighting to prove themselves. But Jamal didn't mind. He had a mission: his daughter. He worked long hours, often staying late after everyone else had gone home. He knew the office politics weren't in his favor, but he was determined not to let that stop him. He had his moments of success. He'd spearheaded a few campaigns that had earned him a solid reputation with his immediate colleagues, and even got a few compliments from higher-ups. Still, he was never fully embraced by the leadership team, especially by the CEO, Vanessa Clark. Vanessa was sharp, decisive, and always seemed to have a team of loyal followers. There was an air of superiority about her that Jamal couldn't shake. And even though he tried to keep his head down and do his job, he couldn't ignore the way she'd look past him in meetings, or how her approval always seemed to be reserved for the others. But today, something felt different. It was mid-afternoon when Jamal was summoned to the conference room. A quick glance at his phone showed a picture of Maya, her sweet smile lighting up the screen. He smiled, pocketing his phone before heading to the meeting. As he entered the sleek, glass-walled room, he noticed Vanessa sitting at the head of the table. Two other executives, both white men in their mid-40s, sat with their arms crossed, their expressions unreadable. Jamal's stomach tightened as he took a seat. The moment Vanessa spoke, Jamal felt the change in the air. "We're making some changes around here, Jamal," she began, not bothering with pleasantries. "Unfortunately, your performance hasn't been up to par. We're letting you go." The words hit him like a slap across the face. His breath caught, his palms began to sweat, but he held his ground. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after everything. Jamal wanted to ask why. Why him? Why now? But he knew what was coming. He could feel it. There was more to this than just his performance. He'd seen it before. The way people like him, black, lower income, were always given the short end of the stick, no matter how hard they worked. What happened next was something Jamal had never expected. His body tensed, his mind raced. What he said in that moment, what he had the courage to say, would change everything. Jamal sat there, stunned, as Vanessa's words continued to echo in his head. "Your performance hasn't been up to par," she had said. His mind raced, scrambling for any sign of what he might have done wrong. He'd met every deadline. He'd stayed late, put in extra hours, and even helped train the new hires. There had to be some mistake, but when he looked around the room, he saw no sympathy, no understanding. The two executives on either side of Vanessa exchanged knowing glances, their lips thin with a mix of indifference and something darker. Jamal's pulse quickened as Vanessa's cold gaze never wavered from him. "You can clear out your things by the end of the day," she continued. Her voice not even a hint of apology, as if this was just business as usual. "We'll have HR process the rest." "Wait a minute, Vanessa." Jamal finally found his voice, though it came out shakier than he intended. He had to ask, "Why now? What about the projects I've delivered? The clients I've brought in?" Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling slightly into a dismissive smile. "You know, Jamal, people like you always have an excuse. You really think you're irreplaceable? We've given you enough chances. I'm afraid we have to move on." The finality in her words sent a chill down his spine. He knew she was talking about more than just his performance. This was personal. She had never given him a real opportunity to prove himself. Not the way she had with the others. His throat tightened, but he kept his emotions in check. "Are you firing me because of my work? Or because I'm—" He couldn't say it. He had said enough. Vanessa's face stiffened at his unfinished sentence. She leaned forward in her chair, her eyes cold. "I'm firing you because you've failed to meet expectations." Jamal, nothing more, but Jamal knew better. He could feel it, the subtle yet undeniable bias that ran through the office. It was the same bias he had witnessed for years, in the way people of color were always scrutinized more harshly than their white counterparts. It was the way the leadership team never quite believed that someone like him could rise to the top. It was in the way his efforts were often brushed aside, while the same people who'd barely lifted a finger were given credit for his hard work. He clenched his fists under the table, fighting back the wave of emotion, threatening to burst through. This wasn't just about losing a job. This was about the years of mistreatment, the years of seeing his dreams crushed under the weight of systemic racism. "Jamal, this is the final decision," Vanessa said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "You can leave now." Jamal stood, his body trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. He didn't want to walk out of this office. He didn't want to let her see how much this hurt him. But as he stood there, gathering his things, a part of him was screaming to fight back. He wasn't the type to back down. "Not this time. Give me one chance, Vanessa," Jamal said, his voice steady but his heart racing. "Give me a chance to prove I'm worth keeping. Let me work on that big project. We've been discussing the one with the new client. If I don't deliver, I'll walk out of here with no complaints." But Vanessa's expression didn't change. She stood up from her seat, her heels clicking against the floor as she crossed the room to stand in front of him. "You really think that's how it works? That you can just walk in here and demand to stay?" Her eyes were icy, the smile gone. "You're done, Jamal. You're not wanted here." His stomach twisted, the finality of her words sinking in. For a moment, Jamal considered throwing it all away, storming out, and leaving the office behind forever. But something deep inside him told him to stay. He wasn't about to let this go. Not this time. Not when he knew the truth. As Jamal gathered his things, he shot a look at the two executives sitting across the table. They didn't say a word. Their eyes flicked to the floor, pretending not to notice, pretending to be oblivious to the reality of the situation. When he reached the door, Jamal turned around, facing Vanessa one last time. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low but firm. "You'll see. You won't get away with this." Vanessa didn't flinch. She didn't even seem to care. "Good luck," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Jamal's chest tightened, and he turned on his heel. walking out of that office for the last time, but as he walked out of the building and into the cool Chicago air, a fire began to burn inside him, a fire that wouldn't be extinguished. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And soon, Vanessa and everyone else would realize that Jamal wasn't someone they could push aside so easily. The real battle had just begun. Weeks passed after the confrontation, and Jamal's life seemed to shift in ways he hadn't expected. The case, which had begun as a personal battle for justice, quickly gained momentum. Sarah, his lawyer, worked relentlessly, organizing every shred of evidence they had, ensuring that the allegations against Vanessa's company were airtight. It wasn't just about one wrongful termination anymore, it was about the systemic nature of racial discrimination in the workplace. And the more Jamal and his team dug, the more stories came to light. Jamal's phone buzzed late one afternoon with an email from Sarah. He opened it, his heart racing. The settlement offer, Vanessa's company, in the face of mounting evidence and the very real possibility of a public trial, had agreed to settle. But the terms were something Jamal hadn't anticipated. The company would issue a formal apology to him and his colleagues who had come forward, and more importantly, they would implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training and policies across all departments. Jamal's own firing would be officially overturned with a generous compensation package in place. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the change, the recognition, the accountability. He smiled at the email, but it wasn't relief he felt, it was something deeper. Empowerment, a sense of victory not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated like a second-class citizen because of the color of their skin. Weeks later, the story made the news. The settlement was widely reported, with outlets covering not only the legal victory, but the company's failure to address the systemic racial issues that Jamal had brought to light. Vanessa, once the epitome of corporate power, was now at the center of a media storm. Her public image took a massive hit, and while she remained with the company for a time, her reputation would never be the same. But it wasn't just Vanessa's downfall that Jamal found satisfying, it was the shift that followed. Other employees, those who had been silenced, began to speak out. Jamal's case acted as a catalyst for change within the company. Former co-workers came forward, sharing their own stories of bias, of being overlooked or passed over for promotions because of their race. The company could no longer hide behind their polished corporate facade. There were real consequences for Vanessa's actions. But the most significant impact wasn't just the legal ramifications, it was the shift in the culture that Jamal had sparked. At home, things began to change, too. Jamal was no longer just scraping by. He was a hero to Maya, who saw him in a new light. She didn't know the full extent of what had happened. She was too young, but Jamal could already see the confidence in her eyes. The way she walked into a room, shoulders back, head high. She was proud of her father, and that pride carried more weight than any paycheck or promotion ever could. Jamal went on to start his own consulting firm, helping other minorities navigate the treacherous waters of corporate America. His success wasn't just about financial gain, it was about offering people who'd been marginalized the tools to fight back, the strategies to succeed. He wanted to make sure they didn't have to go through what he had. And then, one morning, he received a call that would change everything once more. The company that had fired him, the one that had so carelessly discarded him, was now reaching out. They wanted Jamal to come in, not as an employee, but as a consultant. They wanted his expertise to help them reframe their entire corporate culture, to integrate what he had fought for into their operations. Jamal didn't have to think twice. He agreed, but with one condition. He wanted a seat at the table. He wanted to help steer the conversation, make sure real, lasting changes were made, and that his story wasn't just another headline that faded away. It wasn't about the money or the prestige. It was about making sure that every person, no matter their background, had an equal shot at success. It was about building a world where people didn't have to fight against a system rigged against them. And as he hung up the phone that day, Jamal realized something he hadn't expected. He was no longer fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone who had ever felt invisible, unheard, and unimportant. He had turned his pain into power. There would always be more battles to fight. There would always be more work to do. But for the first time in his life, Jamal felt like he had won something that mattered. He had forced the world to see him, to recognize his worth, and in doing so, had started a ripple of change that would continue long after his story had been told. The powerful truth was that change, no matter how difficult, was possible. But it was only through standing up, speaking out, and refusing to be silenced that anyone would ever make a real difference. Jamal had faced the worst of humanity, but he came out stronger. And his story was far from over. The world needed more people like Jamal, people who had the courage to speak the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Because in the end, it wasn't just about winning a battle, it was about changing the world for the better. And Jamal had shown that one person could indeed make a difference.